welcome back to another episode of You, Me, and News. This is episode 6, and I am your very own teacher, Sam. Today, we're diving into a topic that has been debated in the world of mixed martial arts. Should UFC fighters who are not native English speakers learn English? So perhaps this isn't like breaking news or anything, but I think that a lot can be said about this topic. And ultimately, I'd really like to know your take on this whole thing. First of all, what does the UFC stand for? It stands for Ultimate Fighting Championship. It's a big fighting organization. In fact, it's the biggest one in the world. The UFC has approximately 611 fighters. By the way, did you notice that I am using the expression approximately here, which I've taught you in one of the previous YouTube episodes? So pay attention to that, right? Now, the UFC has approximately 611 fighters, and not all of them are native English speakers. Please don't say native. The correct pronunciation is native, native. But what exactly is a native English speaker? Look, a native English speaker is someone who learned English as their first language when they were a baby, basically, right? They grew up speaking English at home, at school, and in just their everyday life. For example, the famous American actor Brad Pitt is a native English speaker. So is Denzel Washington, and so is Natalie Portman. Obviously, there are many other examples, but just giving you a few here, right? So the UFC has approximately 611 fighters, but not all of them are native English speakers. Many of the fighters come from Brazil, Russia, China, Mexico, South Korea, and many other non-English speaking countries. And as someone who teaches English and understands the power of language, I find this conversation fascinating. Pay attention to the phonetic here. Fascinating. If something is fascinating to you, it's interesting. So honestly, I find this question fascinating. I find it interesting. Teacher, which question? Should non-native English speakers who fight for the UFC invest in learning English? In other words, should they learn English? In this case, and with this question, I'll actually give you my take on it right here, right now. I really believe that they should. Please allow me to give you 3 reasons why. The UFC is a global sport with fighters from all over the world. Some come from Brazil, Russia, China, Mexico, and many other non-English speaking countries. But when it comes to the business side of the sport, English dominates. Press conferences, post-fight interviews, social media interactions, most of it happens that's right, in English. Write down this new verb here, by the way, to dominate, to dominate. If English dominates, it means that English is everywhere. It means that it's popular, that it's used everywhere. So, in the case of UFC fighters, it's used during press conferences, interviews, and so on. What is a press conference, by the way? It's basically the time either before or after a fight when a fighter sits down and talks to the press. The press means the media, all the journalists, right? Now, let's assume that you are the UFC fighter. Let's just use you as an example. What do you do during a press conference if you can't speak English? Well, obviously, you can use an interpreter. Let me stop here just for 1 second. Do you see how I said an interpreter? Why didn't I say a interpreter? Because the noun interpreter starts with an I, which is a vowel. How many vowels do we have in the English language, by the way? We have 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U. Pause the video here and write this down. Now, because the noun interpreter starts with a vowel, I have to use this article, un. So, an interpreter. Now again, what do you do during a press conference if you can't speak English? Well, obviously you can use an interpreter, but I'll say here what I've always said about interpreters. Why would you give someone else the power of your own words? Honestly, this is not to disrespect interpreters. I used to work as an interpreter myself. Also, there are truly some excellent interpreters out there. But you see, out of all the people that exist in the world, who knows your story, your thoughts, your ideas the best? You do, of course. So your goal shouldn't be to use an interpreter. Your goal should be to become so fluent and confident with your English that you won't need an interpreter. Does that make sense? Now, I'd actually like to show you a couple of examples of UFC fighters who are not native English speakers and who most often have had to use interpreters because they can't speak English. Now, take a look at this with me here, please.
Eu não sou mais um. Você me deu um cara com 20 dias, que era o Tony. Eu fiz o que você achava que ninguém achava que eu ia fazer. Eu fui lá e fiz o contrário.
Dana, you gave me once a guy in 20 days and I came here and fought. Today I did the other way around.
Eu tinha que esperar os momentos certos, bloquear bem o chute dele. Em cima disso, tentar trabalhar minha mão para tentar nocauteá-lo.
Yeah, I've been boxing a lot, so this is what I've been working on. It was a little bit harder because he is a softball, so I had to pick my moments, pick my shots in there. But, you know, I was able to land some good shots on him.
하니까 몸이 좋았고 상태가 좋았고 지치지도 않았고 근데 넘을 수 없는 벽을 느낀 것 같았어요.
I was most confident out of my entire career. I wasn't tired. I was ready to go, but it felt like I hit a wall that I cannot go over.
So what did we see in every single one of these clips? We saw non-English speaking UFC fighters completely depend on interpreters to speak for them, in a sense. Just to be clear, we just saw some stellar interpreters, by the way. Here is a new adjective for you, stellar. Stellar means outstanding, excellent, fantastic. So again, just to be clear, we just saw some stellar interpreters here. In my opinion, they did a fantastic job. But again, why would you give away your own power to speak to someone else when you could actually express yourself and say whatever it is that you want by yourself? Make sense? Now, not to brag, but with this next example, imagine me as a very proud English teacher speaking here. I want to show you another example of what happens when you don't need someone else to speak for you. Check out my dear student Vinny, also known as Lock Dog, who also happens to be a UFC fighter. Let's take a look at this clip here. Zoom in on the clip where Vinny politely declines the need for an interpreter. Take a look at that here one more time.
And what do you think is wrong?
I was injured before the fight.
It's almost like he's saying, hey man, thank you so much, but I got this. I got this. 3 short words, but 3 very powerful words. And by the way, this is an example of a student who didn't know much English when we started working together. But guess what? He has been determined and very persistent ever since the beginning. To Vinny, it's like nothing will stop me from learning English. He shows up to our classes, he listens to every YouTube video, he reads books in English, honestly, even if he doesn't understand everything. So my point here is Vinny is really trying his best, and even though his English isn't perfect yet, in the clip that I showed you, you can see that he tried. He expressed himself in English on his own, and it was perfectly understandable. You see, I respect that. I respect that so much. So now, do you understand the difference between giving the power of your own words to someone else, a different person, right? Instead of you being in control of your own words, your own story. There is also a second reason why I think that non-native UFC fighters should learn English, because of the business perspective. Let me explain. Look, the UFC is not just about fighting. It's about selling fights. That's right. Fans love fighters who engage with them, who can talk about their fights, call out opponents, and create hype. English-speaking fighters often have an easier time doing this. Just think about someone like Conor McGregor. His ability to talk made him one of the biggest stars in the sport. Even fighters like Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland use their words to build their brand, right? By the way, what is an opponent? Careful with the pronunciation, please. It's not opponent. No, it's opponent. Opponent. An opponent in a UFC fight is the person that you are fighting against. And what about the noun hype? It's when you are able to promote your fight, to create a little bit of hysteria around it. Like I mentioned earlier, in the fight world, English dominates. So how can you, as a fighter, create any type of hype if you don't know how to speak English? A great example of this is the Brazilian fighter Charles Oliveira. When he first became the champion, he needed a translator for everything. But guess what? Over time, we've seen him making an effort to speak more English, even if it's just a few words. Why? Because he knows that connecting with a wider, bigger audience helps his career. Speaking of Charles Oliveira, there is a specific clip that I would like to show you guys here. Please take a look.
Ele tentou, disse que falou com o Dana, ele queria fazer essa luta no Brasil, diz ele.
Por que não aconteceu essa luta no Brasil? Vocês são muito bullshit, vocês falam demais, vocês correram pra caraco. Eu luto contra você em qualquer lugar do país. Para de
These
falar
guys
merda.
always want to magnify, doesn't speak English, nobody understands you.
So what exactly did you see in this clip? You saw Charles Oliveira speaking in Portuguese, and then his opponent decided to mention, hey, you want all the money fights, but you can't even speak English. The reason why I wanted you guys to see this video is because Oliveira, in my opinion, opened himself up to this comment. In other words, he kind of left this door open here so that his opponent could kind of make fun of him for not knowing English. You see what I mean? Oliveira left that door open because, unfortunately, he doesn't know how to speak English. Believe me when I tell you, the best confidence you can possibly have when it comes to your English is being able to speak English on your own. It's being confident enough to speak it so that nobody can make fun of your situation, like the guy did in this video. Honestly, I don't even think that this guy was, like seriously or brutally making fun of Oliveira, but still, He was making fun, right? The reality is, the UFC markets its biggest fights in English-speaking countries, mostly the United States and the United Kingdom. Look, MMA is growing in Brazil, China, and even the Middle East, but the biggest pay-per-view numbers still come from the English-speaking market. Fighters who speak English are more likely to get bigger promotional opportunities, sponsorships, and of course, media coverage. Look, as a UFC fighter, you obviously want to get sponsors, right? Of course you do. But why? Because that means you'll be able to earn more money. More people will know you and all that other good stuff. Also, as much as journalists want to talk to UFC fighters, it's always a bit more challenging to do it when the fighter doesn't speak English. As I mentioned earlier, there's always the option of having an interpreter, but again, why give that power to someone else? Why give someone else the power to tell your own story? You should be the one telling the story. And this brings me to reason number 3, which is storytelling. Yes, the fighter should know how to talk about his or her story in English. Which story? His or her life story, of course. I also feel like this reason is extra personal to me because if you've followed me long enough, you know that I am not a native English speaker either. You also probably know that I am a polyglot, which means I can speak several languages. So at this point, I feel like I am a little bit of an expert, when it comes to understanding and hearing stories in different languages. I swear to God, there is nothing like being able to tell your own story using your own words. It makes your story so much more powerful. Wait, which story, teacher? The story of your background. Where did you come from? How did you get to this point of your life? What did you have to go through in order to get to this point? People are always looking for these types of stories. People can never get enough of these types of stories. Why not? Because all of us are always looking for inspiration. And there truly is a lot of inspiration in many of these UFC fighters' stories. Just look at Alex Pereira. He's an incredible Brazilian fighter with a scary knockout power and an incredible life story. But because he doesn't speak English fluently, he doesn't talk much during press conferences. By the way, some fans find that mysterious and cool, but it also limits how much the UFC can market him. Compare that to someone like Colby Covington, who isn't afraid to say anything, and whether people love or hate him, they listen to him. In other words, he's able to express himself in English. Now, I really want to add this when it comes to Alex Pereira. I really want to add this because it's a fact. He is a huge star in the UFC, no doubt about it. People around the world love him and his story. In fact, listen to this. Alex Pereira's journey started in the favelas of São Paulo. And now he is one of the UFC champions. And he is a testament to resilience and determination. Honestly, he grew up in poverty. He left school at the age of 12 to work as a bricklayer's assistant. And then later, he started working in a tire shop. And during this time, he developed a serious alcohol addiction, sometimes drinking up to a liter of alcohol daily. Seeking change, Pereira turned to kickboxing at 21, using the sport to overcome his addiction and completely transform his life. In fact, I have to show you this short clip here. Please take a look.
The seemingly random Reddit post goes viral. Nothing special at first glance, yet people are freaking out. It's a Google Street snapshot of a tire repair shop in Sao Paulo. But here's the thing, it was captured 12 years earlier. Pay attention to the man in the background. He's the reason why the post went viral. Because 12 years later, he stood at the center of Madison Square Garden, still a mystery to millions of fans who could only speculate about him.
So what did you just see in that clip? You saw an image of Alex Pereira, who used to work at a tire shop. And this is who he is today. By the way, nothing wrong with working at a tire shop, but also nothing wrong with wanting to improve your life and aim for higher goals, right? Now, did you see that reception at an airport in South Korea? It's incredible. I absolutely love it. Yet, I have so many questions about that clip. Why does he do that famous walk? Why does it look like he is shooting an arrow? Why does he always say chama? I want to know that story. I really do. Now, obviously, because I can speak Portuguese, I can listen to him tell the story in Portuguese. But my point is, I'd love to hear him share it with people and fans around the world in English. Can you imagine how many more people would feel inspired by his story? I imagine someone like Alex Pereira being a guest on the Joe Rogan podcast one day, where he can share his story with millions of people. But look, obviously and realistically, for that, you need the English language. I'd like to show you guys 2 more clips here. Please take a look.
Chama.
First round finish, UFC 300, but I mean, you've had nothing but big moments in your career so far, it seems. So where does this one rank?
Parabéns, Alex, pela vitória. Ganhou de nocaute aí rápido, primeiro round no UFC 300.
Toda luta, todo nocaute, para mim é especial, né? Bom, essa luta aqui
Here is Alex attending a press conference after one of his fights. And as you can see, he started the conference with his famous chama. And then all the questions were answered in Portuguese, of course, with the help of an interpreter. But now, look at this fake video here, or I should say, the video is not fake. The part where he speaks English is fake because it's AI generated. Let's take a look.
chama.
A little bit of confusion at the end of round 1. You dropped him. It was so loud, most people couldn't hear the bell. Did you think the fight was over at the end of round 1, or did you know that it was going to the second round?
No, man. Everything has its rules, you know? One of the rules of the day is that he has to get up on his feet. So he was able to get up. I was not going to be the one contesting, going on a break, you know? So I told my coach, I think he's going to go full blast right now, so I got to stay composed.
Yes, him speaking in English is fake. It's totally fake. But isn't it so different when you can just be in control of your own story and your own words, right? Now, check out the question from this journalist. You're really going to like this. Take a look.
Alex, with a victory this weekend, can we expect more English in the cage from you?
Com a vitória esse final de semana, dá pra gente esperar pouquinho mais de inglês seu na entrevista?
Não.
You see, yeah, they are laughing a bit, joking a little bit, because what he said is funny. But at the same time, it's clear that people would love to be able to communicate with him in English. So this is it for today. And as always, I'd like to know your take on this video. What do you think? Should the fighters learn English? Should they improve their English? Also, as always, please subscribe to the channel and write down the words that we have learned here today. Remember to dominate, stellar, interpreter, opponents, hype, sponsorship, media coverage, testament, bricklayer, tires, and many, many more. Thank you for watching, and see you again next Wednesday.